My daughter posted a smiling pizza selfie while I was lying alone in the ICU wondering if I would survive the night. The caption said, "Living my best life." At first I thought there had to be some mistake. Surely she didn't know I was in intensive care. Surely she hadn't ignored the hospital's calls. But when the nurse quietly told me they had called her 12 times and left 3 urgent voicemails, I realized the painful truth. She knew. She just didn't come. I stared at that photo for a long time. Hundreds of people were liking it. They were calling her an amazing mother, a wonderful friend, someone who always brought joy wherever she went. None of them knew that. Just a few miles away, her own mother was lying in a hospital bed completely alone. What my daughter didn't know, though, was that 3 days before I collapsed, I had sat inside my attorney's office and signed documents that legally changed everything. The house she'd always expected to inherit, the savings her father and I had spent 43 years building, even the future she'd already planned for herself. It was all gone, not because I wanted revenge, not because I stopped loving my daughter, but because there comes a moment in every parent's life when protecting your peace becomes more important than protecting someone else's excuses. She thought the pizza selfie would be forgotten in a few days. She had no idea that it would become the reason she lost everything she thought was already hers. To understand why I made that decision, I have to take you back to where our family first began to fall apart. My name is Eleanor Collins. I'm 68 years old. I've spent 43 years raising one daughter, paying one mortgage, celebrating birthdays I could barely afford, skipping vacations so someone else could chase dreams. Now I'm counting the tiny green flashes on a heart monitor. My phone vibrates against the tray beside me. For one beautiful second, hope rushes through my chest. Claire. She's single quotes, as finally calling. Maybe she's on her way. Maybe traffic kept her. Maybe she's been crying. Maybe my trembling fingers reach for the phone. Not a call, not even a text. A notification. Claire Collins uploaded a new photo. My thumb hesitates before opening it. Then the screen fills with my daughter's smiling face. She's sitting inside Antonio's brick oven pizza on Jefferson Avenue. 3 of her friends crowd around the booth. Their glasses are raised. Half a pepperoni pizza is already gone. Melted cheese stretches from someone's slice. Claire's mouth is open in laughter. The caption underneath reads, "Living my best life." Sometimes you just have to choose happiness. Over 200 people have already liked it. Comments, "Pour in girl, you deserve it. You always know how to have fun. Queen energy." My eyes move back to her smile. I recognize that denim jacket. I bought it for her birthday last October. $189. She'd hugged me that day. She'd called me the best mom in the world. Now, she's eating pizza while I lie in intensive care, after doctors spent 4 hours trying to stabilize my heart. I don't cry. That's the strange thing. People imagine moments like this exploding into anger. Mine doesn't. Something quieter happens. Something heavier. Disappointment has a sound. It isn't loud, it's the silence that fills a room. After Hope quietly walks out, I lock the phone, lay it on my chest, close my eyes, and finally accept something I've been refusing to admit for years. I'm not waiting for my daughter anymore. She's simply not coming. But what Claire doesn't know, what no one except my attorney knows, is that 3 days earlier, before the ambulance lights reflected across my living room windows, I had signed something that would change both our lives forever. Not because I hated her, not because I wanted revenge, because sometimes love has to stop writing blank checks to someone who stopped reading your heart years ago. The papers were already filed, already recorded, already beyond anyone's ability to undo. Claire had no idea. She thought she still knew exactly how the rest of my story would end. She was wrong, but to understand why I was lying alone in that hospital bed, you need to come back with me. Because family betrayal doesn't begin with one cruel photograph. It begins with hundreds of tiny choices. The choices we make, the moments we excuse, the warnings we ignore, because they're spoken by people who love us. Before I tell you what I signed and why, I want to ask you something. If you've ever been let down by the person who was supposed to show up for you, if you've ever waited for a phone call that never came, subscribe to The Forgotten Diary. These stories are for people who know that the deepest wounds are often left by family. Now let me tell you how I ended up in that hospital room. 3 years earlier, life looked ordinary. I lived at 147 Willow Creek Lane in Cedar Falls. It wasn't a grand house, just a two-story brick home my late husband, Thomas, and I bought in May of 1989 for $116,400. We painted every room ourselves. Thomas planted 2 maple trees in the front yard. One of them still leans slightly to the left after an ice storm 20 years ago. I never fixed it. He used to say imperfections proved something had survived. Thomas passed away from pancreatic cancer 8 years before the ICU. After the funeral, everyone promised they wouldn't let me be alone. Most promises disappear faster than flowers. Claire remained. Or at least, I believed she had. She was 30-8. Bright. Beautiful, charismatic, the kind of woman who could make strangers adore her in 5 minutes. She also lived almost entirely through the glowing screen in her hand. Every breakfast became a photograph. Every sunset became content. Every act of kindness became evidence that she'd performed one. Online, she looked like the perfect daughter. Offline. Reality was quieter, more complicated. The first warning came on Mother's Day. She invited me to brunch at Lakeside Cafe. She spent nearly 20 minutes arranging pancakes, flowers, and coffee cups before allowing anyone to eat. Hold your smile a little longer, Mom. Double quotes. Click. Double quotes. No, that one isn't right. Click. We need better lighting. By the time she'd posted the pictures, my pancakes were cold. She'd never noticed. The comments rolled in. Best daughter ever. You're so lucky to have each other. She smiled at the screen longer than she'd smiled at me. Maria noticed. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Maria Alvarez. 76 years old. Silver hair always tied into a loose bun. She lived across Willow Creek Lane with her orange cat, Biscuit, and enough tomato plants to feed half the county. She'd been my closest friend since Thomas died. She watched Claire leave that afternoon, then quietly carried 2 slices of homemade peach pie onto my porch. You looked lonely at your own Mother's Day, she said. I laughed. She didn't, Eleanor. Maria stirred her tea. Some people learn to perform love before they learn to practice it. I defended Claire. She's busy. Work is stressful. Social media is part of marketing. Maria simply nodded. When someone keeps showing you who they are, she whispered, don't keep introducing them to the person you wish they were. I didn't listen. I wanted to believe mothers could love hard enough to erase disappointment. They can't. The second warning came. 6 months later, October 11th. Claire asked to borrow $8,750, just temporarily. She said her husband, Derek, had experienced delays with a construction contract. I'll pay you back before Christmas. I transferred the money. Christmas came, no repayment. January arrived. Still nothing. When I gently mentioned it, she laughed. Oh Mom, families don't keep score. Families don't. But banks do. Savings accounts do. Retirement funds do. I quietly withdrew less from my own account that winter, skipped replacing the furnace, until spring. Never mentioned why. The third warning hurt more than the money. It was my 68th birthday. Claire organized a surprise dinner, or so she said. She arrived 45 minutes late, because she'd been filming content for a restaurant opening downtown. She spent most of dinner answering messages, then left early because another event promised better networking. I carried my own birthday flowers inside. Maria helped me arrange them. She didn't criticize Claire. She simply looked around my quiet kitchen. Love isn't measured by gifts, she said softly. It's measured by where someone chooses to be when they don't have to. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't realize then how important it would become, because around that same time, without telling Claire, I scheduled my first appointment with attorney Daniel Mercer. His office sat above an old bookstore on Main Street. Nothing dramatic, nothing secretive. I simply wanted my estate organized. Thomas always handled paperwork. Now I needed someone to explain wills, trusts, beneficiaries, deeds. Mr. Mercer listened more than he spoke. He asked thoughtful questions. Mrs. Collins, he finally said, good estate planning isn't about predicting death. He smiled gently. It's about protecting peace. At the time, I still intended to leave everything to Claire. The house. My investment account worth approximately $412,000. Thomas's restored 1967. Pick up. Every family photograph, every recipe, every memory. But before I signed anything. Mr. Mercer handed me a folder. Take your time. I did. And while I was taking my time, Claire kept making choices. Choices that slowly answered questions I'd been too afraid to ask. People often say what goes around comes around. I used to think karma arrived like lightning. Fast. Dramatic. Maria disagreed. She smiled over her garden fence one evening while trimming roses. Karma usually arrives wearing comfortable shoes, she said. It walks slowly enough that you mistake it for ordinary life. At the time, I didn't understand. Soon. I would. The winter that followed seemed determined to test every promise I'd ever believed about family. January settled over Cedar Falls, with thick gray skies and sidewalks glazed in ice. The maple trees outside my house stood bare, their branches scratching softly against the upstairs windows whenever the wind picked up. Most mornings I wrapped myself in Thomas's old wool cardigan, brewed coffee in the chipped blue mug he'd loved, and watched the neighborhood wake up. Those quiet mornings became my favorite part of the day, not because I enjoyed being alone, because loneliness had stopped surprising me. Claire still called. Just not to ask how I was doing. She called when she needed advice. Or money. Or someone to pick up Oliver, my 8-year-old grandson, from school because she had another last-minute opportunity. Oliver was the brightest part of my week. He had Thomas's gentle eyes and an endless curiosity that made every walk feel like an adventure. Grandma, he'd ask while kicking through piles of leaves. Why do birds never get lost? Questions like that reminded me there was still goodness growing somewhere in our family. I held on to that hope more tightly than I probably should have. One Friday afternoon, Claire arrived almost an hour late to pick him up. She barely stepped inside before saying, "Mom, I need another favor." I smiled anyway. What kind? She hesitated just long enough for me to know it involved money. Derek and I found the perfect investment. It's guaranteed to double in value. We just need $22,000 to get in. I looked at her carefully. Didn't you tell me last month things were tight because of Derek's construction contract? This is different. And the $8,750. She sighed dramatically. You always bring that up. I've brought it up once. She rolled her eyes. Mom, why are you acting like a bank? Maria happened to be watering the flowers outside when Claire raised her voice. Later, after Claire sped away without the money, Maria carried over a basket of fresh bread. She never asked what had happened. She already knew. You know, she said while slicing the warm loaf. People don't become entitled overnight. I stared at the butter melting across the bread. They become entitled because someone keeps rescuing them. I lowered my eyes. I think that someone has been me. Maria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Loving your child isn't the mistake. What is? Protecting them from every consequence. Her words stayed with me. A week later, Daniel Mercer called. I've prepared the estate planning documents. We discussed. I thanked him, then postponed the appointment again. Something inside me still resisted making any permanent decisions. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe Claire would change. Maybe I was overreacting. Hope can be remarkably stubborn. Then came March 14th, a Tuesday, the day everything finally tipped. I woke up with a dull pressure in the center of my chest. Nothing alarming. Just enough discomfort that I moved more slowly than usual. Claire had promised she'd stop by after lunch. I'll help you clean out the garage, she'd said over the phone. We'll finally get around to it. I believed her. By noon, I'd already dragged 3 dusty boxers into the driveway. Inside one of them was Thomas's old fishing tackle. Inside another were Claire's elementary school drawings, construction paper, butterflies, crayon, family portraits. A handmade Mother's Day card that read, "My mommy is my best friend." I smiled despite myself. The little girl who wrote those words had loved me with her whole heart. Somewhere along the way, adulthood had taught her to love convenience more. 1 o'clock came. No Claire. At 2, I called. Straight to voicemail. At 3, she texted, running behind. Rain check. No apology. No explanation. Just 2 words. Rain check. I looked around the driveway. Boxes scattered everywhere. The wind had started blowing old photographs across the concrete. One picture landed face up. Thomas, holding 5-year-old Claire on his shoulders. During the county fair, she looked so happy, so safe. I bent down to pick it up. The sharp pain in my chest returned, stronger. This time, it spread into my left shoulder, then my jaw. I leaned against the garage door. Breathe. I whispered. The world tilted. I reached into my pocket for my phone. My fingers felt strangely numb. Claire. Emergency. Contact. I pressed her name. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Three times. Voicemail. I hung up and called. Again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. A fourth time. Straight to voicemail. The pain became unbearable. My knees buckled. I remember falling onto the cold concrete. I remember thinking how strange it was that the sky looked so blue. Then everything blurred. It wasn't Claire who found me. It was Frank Holloway, my 72-year-old neighbor. He'd been walking his golden retriever, Maggie. He saw the garage door open, saw me lying on the driveway. He called 911. Before I even realized he was there, the paramedics arrived in less than 8 minutes. One of them asked, "Who's your emergency contact?" "My daughter." "Can you unlock your phone?" I nodded weakly. He called Claire. No answer. He called again while they loaded me into the ambulance. Still nothing. Later, Emily, the ICU nurse, would tell me that the hospital tried 5 more times. They left messages. They marked the calls urgent. No response. Instead, Claire was somewhere else entirely. Wouldn't discover where until later, when I woke after emergency treatment. Everything felt distant. My chest ached. My throat was dry. A doctor named Dr. Samuel Green stood beside the bed. "You experienced a significant cardiac event, Mrs. Collins." I swallowed. "Heart attack?" He nodded gently. "You were fortunate your neighbor found you." Fortunate, it was an odd word. I wondered how different my life might have looked if my daughter had answered just one phone call. That evening, Maria arrived. The nurses allowed her in for only 10 minutes. She walked into my room, carrying no flowers, no balloons, just herself. She took my hand. I came as fast as I could. I smiled through tired eyes. "I knew you would." She looked toward the empty chair beside my bed. "Has Claire been here?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Maria understood. She leaned closer. "Eleanor." There were tears in her own eyes now. Sometimes life reveals people at exactly the moment we can no longer afford to misunderstand them. I squeezed her hand. "I keep waiting for her." "I know. I always think the next call will be different." Maria nodded slowly. "Hope is beautiful." She paused, but hope without truth becomes another kind of prison. When visiting hours ended, she kissed my forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow." She was. Claire wasn't. The next morning became the longest of my life. Every vibration from my phone made my heart race. Maybe this one. Maybe now. Maybe she's finally seen the missed calls. Hours passed. Nothing. Emily adjusted my "For you should rest." But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the doorway. Waiting. Believing. Excusing. Until late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. For one impossible second, I smiled. Then I unlocked the screen. Not a missed call. Not a worried message. Not even the words, "Are you okay?" Just a social media notification. Claire Collins had posted a new photo. My thumb touched the screen. There she was. Antonio's brick oven pizza. Laughing. Friends surrounding her. A slice of pepperoni lifted toward the camera. The caption beneath it glowed against the hospital. Darkness. Living my best life. Sometimes you just have to choose happiness, while nurses checked my heart. Rhythm. While doctors debated medication. While I wondered whether I would survive another night. My daughter had found time to stage the perfect pizza. Selfie. She had missed 12 phone calls. She had ignored 3 voicemails, marked urgent, yet somehow, she had time to choose the right filter. I stared at that smiling face for a long time. Then something inside me became perfectly still. Not broken. Not angry. Still. Because in that silent hospital room, with antiseptic in the air, and monitors blinking beside me, I finally understood something Maria had been trying to teach me all along. Love cannot survive on memories alone. It must also survive on choices, and Claire had made hers. Now, it was time for me to make mine. When the doctors finally discharged me 6 days later, the spring sunshine felt almost unfamiliar. The world had continued without me. Children still rode bicycles down Willow Creek Lane. Mrs. Patterson still walked her dachshund every morning at exactly 9. The mail still arrived at 11:17, just as it had for years. Everything looked the same. Only WASN single quotes. Maria insisted on driving me home. You are not carrying grocery bags, laundry baskets, or stubborn pride, for at least 2 weeks, she declared as she helped me into her little blue sedan. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd managed since the ambulance ride. You've always been bossy. I prefer experienced. When we reached my house, I noticed a bouquet of supermarket flowers sitting on the porch. There wasn't a card, just discounted carnations already beginning to wilt. Maria looked at them. So, she came after all. I picked up the bouquet. The receipt was still tucked inside the plastic. Purchased that morning. Not while I was in intensive care. When the hospital had called. After. She had learned I was home. The flowers stayed on the porch. I never brought them inside. 3 days later, after my cardiologist cleared me for short outings, I drove downtown to Daniel Mercer's office. The building sat above Hawthorne Books, exactly where it had for decades. The hallway smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Daniel greeted me himself. He stood, shook my hand gently, then paused. You look tired. I am. You also look certain. I am that too. He didn't rush me. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea and waited until I was ready to speak. I kept making excuses for my daughter. I finally said, I know. I thought if I loved her enough, eventually she'd become the person I remembered. Daniel folded his hands. Estate planning isn't about rewarding memories, Mrs. Collins. It's about protecting the future. I nodded. I want to move forward. He opened a thick blue folder. Inside were documents we'd discussed months earlier. Only this time, I understood exactly what they meant. You currently own your home outright, he began. Estimated value, $498,000. Your investment accounts total approximately $412,000. Your savings account contains $47,200. Under your previous will, Claire inherited everything. I looked down at the papers. My husband spent 43 years building that life, and you spent 8 years protecting it after he passed. Yes. Daniel slid another document toward me. This is the Collins Family Preservation Trust. I read every page. Not quickly, not emotionally. Carefully. The trust transferred ownership of my home and most of my financial assets into an irrevocable trust, administered by an independent trustee, rather than by Claire. The primary long-term beneficiary would be Oliver, my grandson. Funds could be used for his education, medical care, and eventually his first home. Claire would receive nothing directly from the trust, not because she was being punished, because she had repeatedly demonstrated she couldn't. Separate love from entitlement. What about the house? I asked quietly. The deed transfers ownership into the trust immediately after recording, Daniel explained. You continue living there for the rest of your life exactly as you always have. No one can remove you. And after I'm gone, the trustee follows your written instructions. Can Claire challenge it? Daniel slowly shook his head. The documents are executed while you're fully competent, witnessed properly, notarized, and recorded with the county. Your physician has also signed a statement confirming your mental capacity. He looked directly into my eyes. This isn't based on emotion. It's based on lawful estate planning. He tapped the final page. Once recorded, the transfer is complete, irrevocable. Yes. No legal recourse. Not successfully. The room became very quiet. For months I'd imagined this moment feeling like revenge. It didn't. It felt like setting down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for years. I picked up the pen. It was surprisingly ordinary. Black. Ink. Silver clip. Nothing dramatic. My hand trembled slightly as I signed my name. Eleanor Grace Collins. One document. Then another. Then the trust certification. Then the updated will, directing that any remaining personal belongings be distributed according to a handwritten letter I'd prepared. Daniel gathered the papers neatly. I'll file these with the county this afternoon. Exhaled. When this is finished, it will already be finished. I closed my eyes for a moment. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt protected. Not by someone else, by my own decision. As I stood to leave, Daniel said something I'll never forget. People often believe estate planning is about deciding who gets property. He smiled gently. I think it's really about deciding what values outlive us. Maria was waiting downstairs outside the bookstore. She took one look at my face. You signed them. I did. How do you feel? I searched for the right word. Not victorious. Not relieved. Exactly. Peaceful. She smiled. That's how you know you made the decision for yourself, instead of against someone else. A week passed, then another. My strength slowly returned. Cardiac rehabilitation became part of my routine. Morning walks grew a little longer. The carnations Claire had left eventually dried on the porch. I threw them away. Still, Claire hadn't mentioned the hospital. Not once. Instead, she sent casual texts. Can you watch Oliver Friday? Do you still have Dad's ladder? Need your lasagna recipe? Nothing about the ambulance. Nothing about intensive care. Nothing about 12 unanswered phone calls. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the truth finally caught up with her. Not because I told her. Because paperwork has a way of arriving exactly when it's supposed to. At 3:42 that afternoon, my phone rang. Claire. For the first time in weeks, I answered calmly. Hello. Her voice was sharp. What did you do? I looked out the kitchen window. Rain tapped softly against Thomas's maple tree. I'm not sure what you mean. I got a certified letter from some lawyer. Daniel Mercer. He says the house is in a trust. Yes, and I'm not listed. No. Double quotes. Silence, then disbelief. You changed everything. I protected what your father and I built. You did this to punish me. Her voice cracked with anger. I am your daughter. I waited until she finished. Then, I answered as quietly as I had spoken every word since leaving the hospital. I didn't do this because you're my daughter. Another silence. I did it because the woman who posted a pizza selfie while her mother lay alone in intensive care isn't the person I can trust to inherit the life your father and I spent 43 years building. She stopped, breathing for a second. You saw that? Yes, I didn't know. The hospital called 12 times. Claire. She didn't answer. They left urgent messages. Still nothing. I wasn't asking you to save my life. My voice remained steady. I was only hoping my daughter would care whether I still had one. I ended the call before either of us said another word. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. The papers had already done all the talking that needed to be done. The letter reached my son before it reached the rest of the family, not because anyone was trying to keep secrets anymore, because certified mail has its own schedule. His name was Michael, and unlike his sister, he had spent years living quietly in another state, raising his family and staying out of arguments that never seemed to end. We spoke every Sunday afternoon, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. He never asked me for money. He never pretended our family was perfect either. When he called that Friday evening, I could hear the concern in his voice. Mom, I received a copy of Attorney Russell's letter. I thought you might. Are you all right? I am now. There was a pause. I wish I'd been there when you were in the hospital. So, he didn't make excuses for his sister. He didn't attack her. He simply sighed. I think she's finally realizing that consequences don't disappear just because we don't like them. I looked through my kitchen window toward the small vegetable garden I'd started after my husband passed away. The tomato plants were finally beginning to climb their stakes. They usually arrive quietly, I said. What does consequences? Claire learned that lesson. Over the next several weeks, she wasn't publicly embarrassed because I wanted revenge. She was embarrassed because the internet never forgets. One of her friends noticed that she'd disappeared from social media after our argument. Curious, she scrolled back through old photographs until she found the smiling pizza selfie. The date matched the day local friends had posted messages asking for prayers because I was in intensive care. People began connecting the dots. Nobody started a campaign against Claire. Nobody needed to. Questions spread naturally. Weren't you at dinner while your mom was in the ICU? I thought you said you were taking care of her. I don't understand. The comments weren't cruel. In many ways. They were worse. They were disappointed. Claire quietly deleted the photograph, but screenshots have a way of surviving long after pride disappears. Her husband, Aaron, eventually confronted her. You told me your mother was stable. I thought she was. You also told me the hospital. Exaggerated. Claire looked away. I didn't know it was that serious. Aaron sat across from her in silence before speaking again. You ignored 12 calls. I know. No. His voice remained calm. I don't think you do. Several months later, I met Maria in the community garden, just after sunrise. She was kneeling beside a bed of lavender, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. Without looking up, she asked, How's your heart? The doctors say it's getting stronger. I wasn't asking about the medical one. I smiled. It still hurts. Of course it does. She sat beside me on a weathered wooden bench. You know what people misunderstand about forgiveness? What they think forgiveness means pretending nothing happened. She shook her head gently. It means refusing to let someone else's choices become the architect of your future. I watched two butterflies drift between the flowers, so I can forgive someday and still keep healthy boundaries. Yes, Maria smiled. Those two things can live in the same heart. Almost. A year passed before Claire reached out again, not with a demand. Not with an argument. Not even with an apology. She mailed me a simple birthday card. Inside, in handwriting I recognized from the little girl who once made construction paper butterflies, were only 3 sentences. I think about that day more often than you probably know. I can't change what I did. If you're ever ready to have coffee, I'll be there. I read those words several times. Then I placed the card inside the same wooden recipe box, where I kept Thomas's handwritten notes and Oliver's childhood drawings, not because everything was fixed, because something had finally become honest. Some wounds close quickly, others become scars that remind us to walk more carefully. Neither kind disappears overnight. The following Sunday, Oliver visited after church. He helped me water the garden. We picked tomatoes together and laughed. When one rolled off the table and landed in the grass, Grandma, he asked, Why do you always smile out here? I looked around at the flowers, the trees, the old porch my husband built with his own hands. Because peace grows slowly, I told him. But once it takes root, it's harder to lose than happiness. He nodded as though that made perfect sense. Children often understand truths adults spend years avoiding. That evening my phone buzzed. Another message from Claire. Just for words. I'm still here. Mom. I didn't answer immediately. Some conversations deserve patience. Some relationships deserve another chance. And some require both people to become strangers to their old habits before they can become family again. I set the phone down. Tomorrow would still be there if she truly wanted to rebuild what had been broken. She would still be there too. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of whatever happened next. Because protecting myself hadn't made my heart smaller. It had finally given it room to heal. The certified envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't expecting it. Neither was my daughter. By the time she called me that afternoon, I was already sitting on my back porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching 2 cardinals hop across the fence my husband had built nearly 20 years earlier. The phone rang 3 times before I answered. Mom. Her voice sounded different, not softer, sharper, like someone trying to keep panic from spilling into every word. I received a letter from attorney Susan Whitmore. I thought you might. What is the Oak Hollow Trust? I took a slow sip of tea before answering. It is exactly what the letter says it is. You moved the house into a trust. Yes, my name isn't on it. No. For several seconds she didn't speak. I could hear traffic in the background, and someone closing a car door. Then came the question she had probably rehearsed on the drive over. Why would you do something like this? I looked toward the old swing where my husband used to read every Sunday afternoon. I didn't do it suddenly. What does that mean? It means I made the decision, after years of watching your choices. She let out a frustrated laugh. So one mistake erased my whole life. I closed my eyes. No, it was never one mistake. That evening, she came to my house. She didn't knock. She walked in the way children do when they've spent a lifetime believing every room, belongs to them. She stopped in the living room. I want an explanation. You deserve one. She seemed surprised by my calmness. Maybe she'd expected shouting, maybe tears. Instead, I invited her into the kitchen. The same kitchen where she'd once stood on a wooden chair, helping me bake Christmas cookies. The same kitchen where she'd blown out birthday candles. Every year, until she moved away. Memory has a strange way of making familiar places feel unfamiliar. She sat across from me. Neither of us touched the coffee I'd poured. Finally she spoke. Do you hate me? The question caught me off guard. No. Then why would you cut me out? I didn't cut you out. Her eyebrows pulled together. I stopped pretending. Silence settled between us. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I kept telling myself that every broken promise was temporary. I folded my hands together. That every forgotten birthday dinner, every unanswered phone call, every time you needed money, but never had time. That it was just a difficult season. She looked away. I believed tomorrow's version of you would make up for today's choices. She swallowed hard. And then I woke up in intensive care. She didn't interrupt. For the first time in years, she simply listened. The nurses called you. I know. The hospital called again. I know. I kept looking at the door expecting you to walk through it. Tears gathered in her eyes. I didn't realize I raised my hand gently. I'm not finished. She nodded. The last thing I saw before I accepted that you weren't coming was your photograph. Her face lost its color. The pizza, yes. I didn't know you could see it. I did. I wasn't thinking I know. No. She covered her face with both hands. I really wasn't. She began crying. Not dramatically. Quietly, like someone hearing the truth for the first time. I thought the hospital would call again if it was serious. They did. I muted my phone. I know. I was angry because we'd argued that morning. I know. I kept telling myself I'd call later. I nodded, and later became too late. She didn't argue. Because there was nothing left to argue about. Sometimes the truth removes every possible defense. After several minutes she whispered, "Is there anything I can do?" I looked at the woman sitting across from me. She wasn't the carefree daughter, smiling over a pizza box anymore. She wasn't the little girl who used to climb into my lap after nightmares either. She was simply an adult, finally meeting the consequences of her own decisions. "There isn't anything you can do about that day," she cried harder. "But there is something you can do about tomorrow." She looked up. "Become someone who answers the phone." Those words stayed between us. Simple. Ordinary. Almost painfully. So. Because every family story eventually comes down to ordinary choices. Showing up, calling back, keeping promises, sitting beside a hospital bed. Love isn't usually measured in grand speeches. It's measured in whether someone pulls up a chair when you need them most. She stood to leave. At the front door she stopped without turning around. "I don't know if you'll ever trust me again." "I don't know either, but I'd like to try." I considered her words for a long moment. Trust isn't rebuilt in conversations. It's rebuilt in consistent actions. "I won't promise you forgiveness today. I understand. I won't promise that things will ever be exactly the way they were." Another quiet nod. "But if you truly want a different ending." I opened the front door. "You'll have to ride it one ordinary day at a time." She walked to her car without saying another word. I watched until she disappeared around the corner. For the first time in many years, I wasn't carrying the weight of fixing someone else's choices. Whatever happened next belonged to her, and somehow, that felt lighter than revenge ever could. The days that followed were surprisingly quiet. Not because everything had been repaired, because nothing had. For the first time in years, I stopped measuring my mornings by whether my daughter had called. Instead, I measured them by smaller things. The sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window, the smell of fresh coffee, the robin that insisted on building its nest in the same maple tree every spring. Peace, I discovered, rarely arrives with applause. It slips into your life so gently that you almost miss it. A week later, my neighbor Helen knocked on the front door, carrying a basket of blueberry muffins. "I baked too many," she said with a smile that fooled neither of us. Neighbors always know more than they admit. She sat with me on the porch for nearly an hour, talking about everything except my family. When she finally stood to leave, she paused. "You know," she said, "people around town have been talking." I smiled faintly. I imagined they would. "They aren't talking about the trust. No. They're talking about the hospital." I looked at her. Your daughter told a few friends she'd been too busy to answer her phone. One of those friends lost her own mother last year. Helen shook her head gently. She didn't take those words very well. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Life has a way of holding up a mirror without our help. Across town, my daughter was discovering that disappointment can spread quietly. No one shouted at her. No one humiliated her. Instead, conversations changed when she entered the room. People who once admired every carefully edited post now seemed more interested in asking real questions. How's your mom doing? Were you able to spend time with her after the hospital? Each question reminded her of the answer she wished she could. Change. Her husband noticed it too. One evening, he sat beside her at the kitchen table. I think you're trying to fix your reputation. She frowned. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? No. He reached for her hand. I think you're supposed to fix your heart. She looked down at the table. I don't know where to start. Start with the truth. Meanwhile, I continued attending cardiac rehabilitation twice a week. The therapists celebrated every small victory. Walking 5 more minutes, climbing 1 extra flight of stairs, keeping my blood pressure steady, healing, they reminded us. Wasn't one dramatic moment. It was hundreds of ordinary decisions. One afternoon after therapy, I stopped at the park. Children were feeding ducks by the pond. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path. Watching them, I remembered something my late husband used to say. The richest people aren't the ones with the biggest houses. They're the ones who can sleep peacefully at night. For the first time since losing him, I understood exactly what he meant. Nearly 2 months passed before my phone rang again. My daughter's name appeared on the screen. I answered, "Hello, Mom. I'm at Oliver's school. Is everything all right? He's receiving an award today." That's wonderful. There was a long silence. I was wondering. Her voice trembled. If you'd like to come to, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't a request for money. It wasn't an excuse. It was simply an invitation, a small one, the kind relationships are rebuilt upon. I'd like that, I answered. When I arrived at the school auditorium, she had already saved me a seat, not in the back, beside her. Neither of us spoke much while we waited. We didn't need to. Oliver walked across the stage with a smile that reminded me so much of his grandfather that my eyes filled with tears. As the audience applauded, he searched the crowd. When he spotted both of us sitting together, his grin grew even wider. In that moment, I realized something important. Children don't need perfect families. They need honest ones. After the ceremony, Oliver wrapped his arms around both of us. Can we all get ice cream? My daughter looked at me uncertainly. I smiled. I think your grandfather would have liked that. She laughed softly through tears. I think he would have to. We walked toward the little ice cream shop across the street. Not as a family that had solved every problem, but as a family finally willing to stop pretending there were no problems at all. Sometimes, that's where healing begins. Not with forgiveness, not with forgetting. But with the courage to tell the truth. And the patience to let tomorrow be better than yesterday. Nearly a year passed before I realized something remarkable. I had stopped waiting, not for an apology. Not for a dramatic confession. Not for my daughter to suddenly become the person I had spent years imagining she could be. Instead, I had learned to appreciate who she was becoming, one honest step at a time. Some weeks we spoke, every day, other weeks only once. The difference was that every conversation felt real. If she was busy, she said she was busy. If she promised to come by at 3, she arrived at 3. Trust wasn't returning because of grand promises. It was returning because of ordinary consistency. One Saturday morning, she knocked on my front door, carrying 2 grocery bags. No special occasion, she said awkwardly. I just thought I'd make lunch. I smiled and stepped aside. I'd like that. As we chopped vegetables in the kitchen, neither of us mentioned the hospital. We didn't need to. Some memories remain in the room, even when nobody speaks about them. Halfway through cooking, she stopped cutting carrots. I found something. What? My old social media memories. I looked at her. The pizza picture came up. She took a slow breath. For the first time, I didn't see myself smiling. What did you see? I saw the woman I never want to become again. I didn't answer immediately. Growth sounds different from guilt. Guilt talks about punishment. Growth talks about change. I'm glad you saw it. I finally said. So am I. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. I deleted almost everything from those years. Why? Because I spent too much time showing strangers a perfect life. She looked around my little kitchen. And not enough time living a meaningful one. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just the sound of soup simmering on the stove. Sometimes the most important moments in a family are the quiet ones. That afternoon, Oliver wandered into the backyard, carrying a packet of sunflower seeds. Grandma, he asked, where should we plant these? I pointed toward the old wooden fence. There. He frowned. But that's the hardest ground. It is. Wouldn't they grow better somewhere easier? I smiled. Maybe. Then why there? Because every time they bloom, they'll remind us that beautiful things can grow in difficult places. He seemed to think about that for a moment before beginning to dig. My daughter watched him from the porch. So can families. I looked at her. They can, but only if everyone is willing to do the work. She nodded. I know. That evening, after they drove home, I carried my tea onto the back porch. That sunset painted the sky with soft shades of gold and lavender. The breeze rustled through the maple tree my husband had planted decades ago. I closed my eyes and imagined him sitting beside me, not because I believed he was there, because love leaves echoes, and some echoes stay with us for the rest of our lives. Thought about everything that had happened. The unanswered phone calls, hospital room, the photograph that changed everything, the trust I signed. People often ask whether karma is real. I think they're asking the wrong question. The better question is whether the choices we make eventually become the life we live. I believe they do. My daughter wasn't transformed because I punished her. She changed because, for the first time, her choices carried consequences that no one could rescue her from. As for me, I discovered that protecting myself didn't make me less loving. It simply taught me that love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. And permission is not the same as compassion. If you're listening to my story while carrying your own heartbreak, if you've spent years showing up for people who only remembered your number when they needed something, please hear this. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for establishing boundaries. And you are certainly not a failure because someone else refused to value your love. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do isn't holding on, it's letting the truth stand on its own. The people who truly love you will eventually walk toward that truth. The ones who don't were already walking away. As for my daughter and me, our story isn't perfect. It probably never will be. Some scars never disappear completely. But scars also remind us that healing is possible. Every spring now, those sunflowers bloom beside the old fence. Oliver insists on measuring them every weekend. My daughter still comes over on Sundays. Sometimes we cook. Sometimes we sit quietly on the porch. Sometimes we simply watch the birds. And somehow, that's enough, because peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in acceptance. And after everything we've been through, acceptance has become one of the greatest gifts of my life. That's my story. Now I'd love to hear yours. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people you loved most, share your experience in the comments. You never know who might read your words and realize they're not alone. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to The Forgotten Diary and join us for the next journey. Until next time, take care of yourself. And never forget that the love you give to others should never cost you the peace you owe yourself.